Podcast City Network.
You are listening to The Rip Griffin Show. Make sure to subscribe to the show on all the major podcast platforms. Here's your host, Rip Griffin.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to tonight's episode. Today, I am joined by a special guest who is the current author of the Singled Out, the story of the true story of Glenn Burke. His name is Andrew Maraniss. Andrew, how are you doing, sir? Looks like we had some technical difficulties there.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm back. I'm doing great, Rip. Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I came across this story that you posted something on social media last week that I thought was truly fascinating, considering everything that Major League Baseball is doing this week in the celebration of Pride Week in the LGBTQ community. That your book that you wrote called Singled Out, the true story of Glenn Burke was truly a phenomenal story. We'll kind of dive into that here on tonight's episode. But before we get into tonight's show, you're a big Vanderbilt fan, big Vanderbilt baseball fan. So how exciting is it to have the Commodores back in the College World Series defending their national title from 2019?
You're right. I live here in Nashville. My job when I'm not working on books is I work at the Vanderbilt Athletic Department. I'm alum of the school. My first job out of college, I was the PR guy for the baseball team at Vandy. So it's really exciting to see them back in the College World Series. I'm actually driving my family. I've got my wife and our kids are 10 years old and 8 years old. So they're right at that age where they're, baseball crazy right now. So we're driving from Nashville to Omaha. We'll see Vandy play their first two games. You may have heard of their star pitchers, Kamar Rocker and Jack Leiter, who will be two of the probably top 5 players drafted in the draft next month. So it's a really fun team to watch. And college baseball, I think, is growing in popularity. I know it's always been popular in Texas with UT having a great program and other schools in the state. But here in Nashville has really fallen in love with this team. And there'll be a lot of people out there in Nebraska watching the games.
I have yet to make it out to Omaha to actually check out the College World Series. I've known people that have gone, that have had that experience. They say it's truly a phenomenal. It's one of those once in a lifetime type situations. And I know you're excited with Vanderbilt going in. I'm excited with Texas coming in as well. I think this elite field is probably one of the best that we've seen in college baseball in years. And unfortunately, we didn't get to experience any college baseball last season, but I really think this is going to be one of the best College World Series that we've ever seen, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I think there's a chance that you're right, and I would recommend going. 2 years ago, 2019 was my first time out there, and I regretted that I had never been before. If you're a baseball fan, it's like a little bit of a slice of baseball heaven when you're out there. I mean, thousands of fans from each school there to cheer on their teams, but then the whole city of Omaha gets behind it. There's kind of a baseball village outside the stadium with vendors selling any possible baseball related item you can imagine. Right. People all day and night just talking about the games. I had a great time and I'm so excited to go back.
It's going to be exciting. I did a show just a couple of days ago, just to kind of set the preview, and I've actually got Vanderbilt and Texas in the final.
All right. Well, as a Vandy fan, I'm glad you picked that UT instead of the other UT, a little closer to Nashville. There'll be a lot of people from Tennessee out there between Vandy and the Vols.
So some good rivalry going on.
Absolutely.
But it's going to be exciting. I'm glad to see college baseball back in Omaha. It's a great place. It fits the atmosphere that college baseball brings. So I'm definitely excited to kind of get to watch some college baseball this weekend. But let's go ahead and jump into your book. Now, is this your first book, or how many books have you written so far?
This book is my third book. So my first book was called Strong Inside. It's a biography of Perry Wallace, who was the first African-American basketball player in the SEC. He played at Vanderbilt in the late 1960s. I also adapted that book for middle school students. So there's two versions of Strong Inside. My second book is called Games of Deception, and it's the story of the first U.S. Olympic men's basketball team, which played at the 1936 Olympics in Nazi Germany. And then Singled Out, the biography of Glenn Burke, is my third book. I'm working on my fourth right now, probably about a third of the way through writing it. It'll come out late next year. It's going to be called Inaugural Ballers, and it's the story of the first U.S. women's Olympic basketball team, which played at the 1976 Olympics in Montreal. So all of these books are, nonfiction, sports history, social issues, kind of all wrapped up into one. It's the kind of books that I like to read myself. I love the research process and just sort of diving into these sports stories that are somewhat unknown. You're never going to find a sports story that no one's ever heard of, just with the popularity of sports. But I try to write about figures or moments that haven't been covered as much as others.
Yeah, and this book that you wrote, Singled Out, which is the true story of Glenn Burke, and for most baseball fans, and I was one of those baseball fans that I had never heard of Glenn Burke before doing the research for you to come on the show tonight. He was the first openly gay player back in the late 1970s. So when you were kind of doing your research and writing the book, had you heard of Burke prior to writing the book?
I had heard of him, but I really didn't know much about his story. I'm a kid that grew up in the 70s and 80s, so I remember his baseball card from 1978 in a Dodger uniform. I had heard the trivia that he had invented the high five, but I knew nothing of the deeper story of his life. And so that's a good place to be, I think, when you're starting a book. You don't have any preconceptions or misconceptions. Everything's new to you as you're researching it. I interviewed a lot of his major and minor league teammates, high school friends of his, family members, people that knew him after his baseball days. Read a lot of old newspaper articles from the Bay Area where he grew up, from LA and Oakland where he played in the majors, but also the minor league cities that he played in. Read a lot of books about baseball back in the 70s, which was fun. Also about the gay rights movement and the backlash to that movement in the 70s too. And so, in all my books, I'm writing about sports, but also placing the character in the context of the times, right. And so that social context is really important in this book as well.
Yeah, it's truly a fascinating story when just based on the research that I kind of did prior to the show. But how long did it take you from your start of your research to final publication? How long was that process in writing the book?
Yeah, it takes me. I had about a year contract to write the book.
Okay.
I got started actually before I had the contract. I knew it was coming, so I worked on the book for a little over a year. Then there's usually about 9 months from the time that pretty much you're done writing it. You've made the copy edits, but it still takes about 9 months for the book to actually hit the shelves. There's a process of publisher designing the book, and I'm lining up photos for it. They design the cover, work on the index and the notes section at the back, begin a publicity plan. So they need to have that time built in. So all told, it was probably closer to 2 years from the time that I really got started until the book came out. It came out March 2nd. So training this year, which was a good time for a baseball book to come out, and then this has been a busy month also with June being Pride Month, and a lot of major league teams sort of acknowledging that. And so I've been, talking about Glenn and his story, and it's been really enjoyable. You mentioned like how much I really know about him. I didn't know that much about him. I don't think that most baseball fans really have heard Glenn's story before. And I think if you're a baseball fan, it's fun to discover a new story that's interesting about your favorite game. And so every chance I have to talk about Glenn Burke, I really enjoy it.
Yeah, just kind of just doing the research prior to the show, like I mentioned, it was interesting to kind of get his story and kind of learn about his life and kind of the trials and tribulations that he kind of had to go through during that time, especially when civil rights movements were very at the forefront of the news, and especially being a baseball player that is very out in the public, and the being a openly gay player was something that it wasn't known and wasn't seen too much during that time. And I'm sure that was, probably rough for him. But when you were doing your research, how hard was it for him to come out as a openly gay baseball player?
Yeah, I would say existing as a gay man in baseball was very difficult for Glenn. He didn't publicly come out for the whole world to know until a couple years after he was out of the game. But while he was playing in the minor leagues, many of his teammates knew the secret. While he was playing with the Dodgers and the A's, most of his teammates knew. The Dodgers traded him to Oakland because the management found out that he was gay. They actually offered him a bribe to get married, and he declined that money and said, well, first they said, we'll give you this money to get married. And he said, to a woman. And when they said yes, he said he wasn't going to go along with that. So, and then when he arrived at the Oakland A's, Billy Martin said he wasn't going to let a gay player, quote unquote, contaminate his team. And so, it was open enough that he was run out of baseball because of who he was, even if, he never sat in front of the cameras and had a press conference to announce it. But I think the hardest part for Glenn, other than being run out of the game, it doesn't get harder than that as a baseball player, is constantly sort of looking over his shoulder, wondering if people who didn't know the secret were figuring it out, concerned that when management of these teams did find out that would be the end of his career, which it did turn out to be, not being able to fully be himself, even around his good friends on the team, including Dusty Baker, the manager of the Astros, who was his teammate with the Dodgers. And so it was kind of a lonely experience for Glenn in these clubhouses at a time as a young player where he really could have benefited from the support of his teammates and of his manager and his general manager, the same people that he was not able to get that support from. And so I think that ultimately affected his play on the field also. Baseball being such a mental game, to not be able to be yourself and to feel that everyone has your back and wants the best for you, it kind of conspired against him in fulfilling his full talents on the field.
Yeah, it was just, reading everything, and to kind of come on into my next question was, the reaction that the Dodgers had when they found out that he was gay. What exactly, when the team went on the road, what was that kind of situation like? Because the team is at the hotels doing different things. What exactly? How did Glenn kind of keep that secret still?
Right. So this is one of the ways that his teammates kind of got in on the secret, is that Glenn would avoid a lot of the social situations with his teammates, or find excuses to exit them pretty quickly. A lot of his teammates were trying to set him up, with women, and they would say, "Oh, come on, just meet her." And so he would show up and meet the woman and then leave 5 minutes later and say, "Well, I met her," or players would have women over to the hotel after the game, and Glenn would have a roommate, and he would say, "Oh, I've got to go shopping." And one of his teammates said, "It's 11:30 at night. Where are you going to go shopping?" Or he would say, "I've got to go call my mom." And it was midnight, so they were questioning why he was removing himself from these situations. When the players would go out to clubs or discos, it's the 70s, Glenn might show up for a while, but then he would leave, or he would go find the gay bars in whatever city they were in and take a cab and get out a couple blocks away. So if someone was following him, they might not know where he was going, and then he would walk back to where he was actually going. So it was kind of a constant game or battle that he was involved in protecting himself, hiding his true identity, because again, Glenn would have preferred not to have to do that, but there was no examples in professional sports of an active gay player that, was able to stay in the game. And so he was very concerned about what this might do to his career.
Just that situation of having to constantly look over your shoulder to make sure that nobody was going to find out probably had to be somewhat exhausting for him.
Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead with your thought. I agree with you.
Because that would definitely transpire to the field, to playing, and which is ultimately probably why I don't know if the team did the teams give up on him. I mean, on his play as well, if that was affected.
Yeah, I don't think, there's some people that will say Glenn wasn't run out of baseball because of who he was. He played his way out of baseball because of his statistics. I don't think that's true for two reasons. Well, first of all, Glenn was a talented player, and he hit over 304 times in the minor leagues on his way up to the Dodgers. He set stolen base records in 2 different leagues in the minors. Junior Gilliam, a coach for the Dodgers, said he had the potential to be the next Willie Mays. His rookie season, he started 2 games in the NLCS against the Phillies. Started game 1 of the World Series at Yankee Stadium. So he was a young player that was highly regarded. And the next season, he's traded early in the season because he's gay. So the Dodgers gave up on him pretty quickly, I would say, not because of his playing ability, but because of his sexuality. When he gets to the A's, he has a little bit of a rougher time in the clubhouse. These guys haven't come up through the minors with him. They didn't know him as well. And so when they figured out Glenn's secret, they weren't as supportive. Glenn was very popular in the Dodger clubhouse. Dusty Baker and Davey Lopes told me he was the most popular player on the team. And here he is, a 4th outfielder, a rookie on a very talented veteran team, with Dusty and Reggie Smith, Rick Monday, Davey Lopes, Bill Russell, Ron Say, Steve Yeager. I mean, this was a veteran team with a lot of name players, and they considered Glenn the life of the clubhouse, which was surprising for me to learn. When he was traded to the A's, there were players crying in front of their lockers, and they knew he was gay. So it wasn't his teammates that had a problem with him. It was management of the team. And the same thing goes at Oakland, where Billy Martin sent him down to the minors in spring training, and Glenn knew he was never going to have a shot to get called back up. And so he quits the game. And I think it's unfair to say he quit. He knew he was not going to get a chance in that franchise. And so, yes, you can say that he didn't set the world on fire with his stats, but he really wasn't given a chance. And beyond that, like we've talked about, he didn't have sort of the free and easy mental state that is required to succeed in the major leagues or the board of managers in general.
Right. It's truly unfortunate for him to have to go through that experience, especially when you get the opportunity to play in a World Series, especially against the Yankees. You get that opportunity to play in the postseason and be effective. You try to bring in offense as best as you can, but at the baseball's highest stage. But we talked about Dusty Baker, who is the current manager of the Houston Astros, who are actually having their Pride Night tonight. So this kind of coincides with the Astros and this story of Glenn Burke. And we talk about Dusty Baker. How instrumental was Baker to Glenn and during his time with the Dodgers?
Yeah, Dusty was kind of like the older brother to Glenn and really took him under his wing. I had a great interview with Dusty in Asheville, North Carolina. I live in Nashville. He lived out in the Bay Area, California at the time, but he was scouting for the Giants. This was before he became the Astros manager when I was working on the book. And he told me he would be in Asheville scouting a minor league game. And so I drove over and met him there. And he told me that when Dusty, was with the Atlanta Braves, Hank Aaron was kind of the older veteran player that took a lot of the younger black players under his wing, and really looked out for them, shared meals with them. When they would go on a road trip, they might get together for lunch with black players from the home, and they would return the favor when those guys came to Atlanta. So there was a real network there. And Dusty tried to introduce Glenn to that network also. But, for Glenn, even with that social system that was there for the benefit of most Black players in the major leagues, Glenn wasn't really able to fully take advantage of that either, because he couldn't really share what was on his mind, or what his interests were, or necessarily want to go to the same places even that they did. But in the Dodger clubhouse, I would say Dusty set a real tone of acceptance for Glenn. He said that there's a couple of different type of rookies. There's the rookies that come in that kind of think they're hot stuff and rub the veterans the wrong way. And then there's the rookies that are fun and sort of bring a levity to the clubhouse. And that was Glenn, with his music and his sense of humor. And he loved basketball like Dusty did too. They're both from California. So Dusty felt like they had a lot in common. He had a chance to be that veteran figure on Glenn's behalf, like Hank Aaron had been for him. So they had a really strong relationship. When Dusty became the manager of the Giants, it was a time where Glenn was dying of AIDS and living homeless on the streets of San Francisco. And there was a game where Glenn showed up at, it would have been Candlestick Park, and is calling out Dusty's name. And Dusty said to me he could hear this voice calling from the stands before the game, but it sounded like an old man. And, Dusty said, as the manager, you can't turn around and greet everyone that calls your name,
Right.
But then this voice said, "Hey, Johnny B," which is what Dusty's friends in baseball called him, his real name and middle name. And he turned around, and it was Glenn, and who was only in his 40s, but was, ravaged by HIV, AIDS at that point, and looked and sounded like he was an elderly man. And it was a really touching moment. You could tell for Dusty to see his old buddy in this condition. Even when I interviewed Dusty, you could still see the emotion, hear the emotion in his voice, talking about what had happened to his friend.
And there was always times that when Dusty was asked questions on Glenn, whether or not, if he knew that he was gay, he always stuck up for him, but didn't actually spread the news publicly
Right.
to everybody. And I think that's kind of gives you a little bit of insight as to what kind of person Dusty Baker is. We see it as an Astros manager. He's always the positive, the hip, the doing the little dancing kind of, always so appreciative, and is always so thankful for everything that he's been able to accomplish and able to do with the Astros, and just in baseball in general. Because this is a game that only a few get to play. And that kind of, you get that tone from Dusty. And when he kind of, just when I was reading about the relationship between Dusty and Glenn, you can kind of get that sense as well, that he's looking out for his teammate, but he doesn't want to spread the news and tell the world, because that's something that it's probably very private for Glenn. So
right, yeah, that would have been Glenn's decision to do that.
Right.
I think you're absolutely right. Dusty, just such a classy person, but a fun person also, and someone, you could almost draw a parallel. So here's a situation where there's a gay player in the clubhouse that is could be perceived as a controversial issue in baseball at that time, right? Or even today, there are no openly gay players, and so it would take a strong and respected figure in that clubhouse to set the tone, to say, hey, this guy's one of us, we're going to treat him right. And so Dusty did that with the Dodgers. You could say that after the Astros scandal, it took someone as respected as Dusty to have the country sort of, well, maybe I don't like what the Astros did, but I respect Dusty, so I'll give him a second chance. And so you put him in these situations. It's the power of his character and personality that has played a key role in both of these situations.
Absolutely. So there was another connection between Glenn and Dusty. I believe it was in that World Series against the Yankees, that there was a celebration that was probably one of the very first that had basically was invented after this game, was the high five. How did that come about?
Yeah, so it was actually a couple weeks before the World Series. It was the last game of the regular season in 1977. Headed into the last month of the season, the Dodgers had three players who had hit 30 or more home runs: Reggie Smith, Steve Garvey, and Ron Cey. Dusty Baker had 29, and so he needed one more home run, and they would become the first team in Major League history with four players with 30 homers. and he never gets this home run. It comes down to the last homestand of the season against the Houston Astros. The first 3 games, he doesn't hit a homer. The last game of the season at Dodger Stadium, J.R. Richard is on the mound for the Astros in the prime of his career. And he's owned the Dodgers and Dusty specifically. So Dusty Baker told me he was pretty much resigned to the fact that he was going to let his teammates down. He was not going to hit this 30th home run. They were not going to make history. But in what turns out to be his last at-bat of the game, he does hit the home run. And so, huge relief for Dusty. The crowd's going crazy, celebrating. Glenn Burke is on deck. And so when Dusty, crosses home plate and is on his way back to the dugout, Glenn is the first person to greet him. And he raises his arm in celebration, and Dusty slaps it. And that's considered the first high five in history. And it does take 2 people. So I asked Dusty, well, who really gets credit for inventing this? And he told me that in his opinion, so many cool things in life have come out of the Bay Area of California, and that's where Glenn Burke came from. He grew up in Oakland and Berkeley, so you got to give Glenn credit for starting it. But the Dodgers coined that term, high five. I mean, certainly in history, people had slapped hands before, but this is the first time that anyone made a big deal about it. They coined the term. They, on their programs and media guides the next couple of years, have pictures of their players high-fiving and explain what a high five is on their scoreboard and encourage their fans to do it. But if you think about Glenn Burke's personality, it made total sense that he would be the person to invent this. He was fun-loving, first of all. He was a good teammate. And so here he was celebrating achievement of a teammate, and celebrating that moment with him, and gregarious and really like Dusty Baker, so it's not surprising that this happened. Surprising is right after that, Glenn Burke comes up to the plate and he hits a home run too. It's his only home run as a Dodger. And the second high five in history took place when he got back to the dugout. Dusty returned the favor to him.
Wow. That's exciting to hear. Just to you can kind of visualize it when it takes place. And that kind of shows you what Glenn was about. He was always the happy, the excitement, the excited player.
Yes.
And just hearing his story is truly phenomenal within itself, because he went through a lot. He went through a lot of turmoil, especially behind the scenes in baseball. But like you mentioned, Oakland kind of gave up on him. The Dodgers gave up on him. What about Glenn after playing baseball? What was his life after baseball like?
All right. So he's out of the game in 1980, is living in San Francisco, in the Castro district. And for a brief period, he's pretty happy, actually. He doesn't have to look over his shoulder.
You still there? Looks like we might have a little connection issue with Andrew. Let's see if I can try to bring him back real quick. Andrew, can you hear me? Looks like we might have lost Andrew. We'll try to keep this going here. But this is truly a phenomenal story within itself. Just hearing about Glenn Burke and everything that he was able to accomplish on the field, but also off the field as well. It's very the things that kind of happened afterwards kind of definitely transpired. Maybe we might have Andrew back. Andrew, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
I apologize. I'm not sure what happened there.
No.
So you asked what happened to Glenn after his playing days. Initially he's pretty happy. He's living in the Castro district in San Francisco. He's incredibly popular. Former Dodger center fielder all of a sudden is in the neighborhood and playing softball and winning championships in the gay softball leagues of San Francisco. Then a couple of things happen. Friends in the softball league start to get sick and are dying. So HIV/AIDS has struck the neighborhood just as he's really settling in there. And also Glenn is hit by a car and has his legs broken, and he loses his identity as an athlete, even a softball player, because of these injuries. And his life begins to spiral out of control. He had been introduced to drugs while he was playing in the major leagues, starts to depend on them a little bit more after the injury, I think, to mask the pain and the mental pain of being robbed of his career in the major leagues, and also not really being fully prepared for what might come after baseball. His career was ended early. He really didn't know what he wanted to do with his life at that point outside of sports. And so even though Glenn's story is inspiring in many ways in the history that he made, it's also a tragic story too. Just a few years, after he has played in the World Series, he's living homeless on the streets of San Francisco. And he eventually dies of AIDS in 1995. On his deathbed, he said that he hoped that his experience would make it easier for gay players in the future. And I think that would be the ultimate legacy of Glenn Burke, as if someone is inspired by his pioneering and comes out. That would sort of close the circle on Glenn Burke. But we really haven't seen it yet. You had Billy Beane, the second gay player to come out again after his playing days, which included playing for the Dodgers, just like Glenn did. And Billy's now an executive with Major League Baseball. This is not the Billy Beane that runs the Oakland A's. There's two of them. But you haven't had an active player come out, and you really haven't seen it across other men's professional sports either. Jason Collins briefly in the NBA, Michael Sam in the NFL, but he never played in a regular season NFL game.
Right.
And so this is really something that is still yet to happen, and hopefully we'll see it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, like you mentioned, this is a very instrumental story of Glenn Burke, and I wish if there are any players that are openly gay, that they would just come out, and I'm sure their teammates would accept them, especially like you mentioned Michael Sam when he was at Missouri. He came out to his teammates, and they openly accepted him. He's there to play football. That's what he's there to do, and he played it at the highest level. And it's unfortunate that he didn't get to experience the NFL. And I hope it's not the case, but that because of his being openly gay, I hope that didn't affect him. But it's just truly a remarkable story, one that I had never heard of until recently, and it's truly exciting. And I appreciate you, Andrew, for coming on and sharing the story of Glenn Burke and continuing his legacy and continue to tell his story.
Well, Rip, I really appreciate that. I apologize for the technical difficulties there, but it meant a lot when you reached out. I'm grateful to have a chance to tell this story, especially you doing it as the Astros are having their Pride Night. I think that the Oakland A's named their Pride Night after Glenn, and so hopefully he's starting to get some attention that I think he deserves, and that as teams do this, as podcasters like you and others tell his story and appreciate his story, I think that all sort of contributes to creating the atmosphere where a gay player would feel more comfortable coming out. If they can see signals that it might be accepted. I think there was an article in the San Francisco paper last week where Mark the A's and Austin Slater from the Giants, Gabe Kapler, the manager of the Giants, all had pretty positive things to say about how they would treat a gay player in their clubhouse. And so I think the times are changing a little bit in the major leagues, and we'll see what happens here the next few years.
Absolutely. Glenn, like I mentioned, I appreciate you coming on the show, sharing the story of Glenn Burke. Please let everybody know, where can they go out and purchase your book?
All right. Thank you. So easiest way, you can see my name on the screen here, but if you go to andrewmaraniss.com, the books page, which will take you to independent bookstore links, Amazon, you can pretty much find it, online or at most major bookstores. It's called Singled Out: The True Story of Glenn Burke. And people can find me on Twitter at the handle you see there, TrueBlue24, which is a reference to the True Blue Brew Crew. Milwaukee Brewers is my favorite Major League Baseball team.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I definitely appreciate you coming on. I'm gonna have to check out the book and read it. So talking to you is definitely inspired me to of course go out and purchase the book and check it out, because I'm excited to read it. So But I truly appreciate you coming on, sharing the book. Like I mentioned, Major League Baseball is doing their MLB Pride Week in honor of the LGBTQ community, and the Houston Astros and the Cleveland Indians are doing their Pride Nights tonight. So, but it's been an exciting week so far. Andrew, I appreciate you coming on again. So that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Take care.
Thanks again.